Hello, everyone. This is Ana Elena from the New Mexico Small Business Development Center. I also have Christopher Garcia joining me for this webinar. Today we have Chad Cooper joining us, who is a cyber business owner. Mr. Cooper will be presenting part 2 of cybersecurity, which covers foundational concepts. Thanks so much for joining us. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Ana Elena, and welcome everybody. This is class 2 of our first course, where we lay out the foundational concepts for cybersecurity. Today's course will cover the information security model, and again, this course covers not only the digital data that you have and how to protect it, but also your physical information, information that you may have printed that needs to be secured inside of file cabinets or behind locked doors, etc. So we'll go ahead and jump in and take a look at what we'll be covering today. As always, we'll give an overview of where we are in the series. We'll recap Tuesday's session on risk, and then we'll jump into all the elements of the information security model. So our company, TILLMAN Cyber, we're a full-service cybersecurity firm covering all aspects of cybersecurity, from encryption to vulnerability assessments, etc. And we have a main focus on cyber training for the people inside of your organization. So let's take a look at where we are in the series right now. Again, this is we've broken the class up into 3 distinct courses. The first course deals with the foundational concepts, and that's where we are today. So we'll be covering information security as part of laying out that foundation and a general understanding of risk and securing our information. Next week, we'll be covering the human factors of cybersecurity, covering user behavior as well as backup strategies. And then we'll conclude with the organizational management component, which is controls and protections, the actual IT steps and the things that we need to be doing to protect our networks and machines, etc. And then we'll wrap up the training with documentation development. And what are those documents that we as organizations need to develop in order to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to have a secure organization. Excuse me. And as always, the training component is important. The training that we're doing today and throughout this course is really designed to not only raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity, but also give us more information on the steps that we can take to keep our data away from hackers, bad actors, nation states, etc. Getting a general idea of what are those things that we can do to mitigate the risk as much as possible. Mitigating the risks on the front end, protecting people from accessing our data, and then also limiting our risk on the back end, and that is, since no program leads to 100% success, eventually something will happen, whether our systems are breached or whether our organizations are attacked. So again, mitigating the fallout of that and making sure that we have proper backups on the back end, that we have a plan in place to recover our data in the event that something bad does happen. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our last session, where we covered the risk management model. And a few things that we covered in this session. Not only did we cover the risk management model, but we also talked about, what are those key risk areas? And the big one being the human element, because users are the weakest links in the security chain. Again, regardless of how sophisticated the technology is that your organization is using to protect your networks and protect your machines, etc., your security is only going to be as good as the people who are using it. And so we focus a lot on people. We also covered statistics and examples, and then we jumped into the risk management model. We also covered some key terms that we'll be using throughout the training. We talked about social engineering, which is the manipulation. It's the psychological tool that bad actors use to try to manipulate us as end users into taking some sort of action that we shouldn't take. Clicking on malicious links, clicking on malicious or corrupted files, and using manipulation and our willingness to trust in order to take some sort of action that benefits them. We talked about malware and ransomware. We covered those phishing attempts, which comes out of social engineering, as well as breaches versus attacks. We also looked at some major companies, some large organizations who suffered cyber attacks in the last 10 years. These are generally companies that we know, and as small business owners, we also have to be diligent to make sure that we're aware that we're targets as small business owners, especially if we have business relationships with other companies or other larger companies. We touched on the target breach, and the target breach from 2013 occurred because of Target's relationship with a small business. The small business got breached, and hackers gained access to Target's networks through a small business. So, when we talk about protecting our information, protecting our data, we're not only protecting it to protect our organization, protect our employees, protect our customers, we're also protecting those who we have business relationships with. We also focused on the risk management model. And when we talked about risk management, the first thing that we had to look at was, what are the threats? And going back to some of the stats we covered in the last session, the threats as they relate to cybersecurity are that 43% of online attacks are aimed at small businesses. And then when we look at the model, we have to say, well, how vulnerable are we to those attacks? Well, what we know is that 66% of decision makers don't believe that they're targets, and that 14% of businesses are actually prepared. So that's 86% of our businesses, our small businesses especially, that are not prepared to protect themselves from these cyber threats. Then as we go through the model, once we know how vulnerable we are to the threats, we have to take a look and see what is the likelihood or the chance that those threats will affect our business. Well, statistically, 50% of small businesses suffered a cyber breach in the last year, and a typical firm experiences 130 breaches in a given year. And again, remember, a breach doesn't necessarily mean that your business is suffering a major attack or a major negative impact, but a breach does mean that someone in some way has either gained access to your network or attempted to get in some form or fashion. So that likelihood and that vulnerability is out there. And then we have to look at what is the impact to the business, right? So statistically, those businesses suffering a full cyber attack, the average cost of that to the business is approximately $200,000. Now, if you look at statistics generally, those numbers may vary from 200,000. I've seen numbers in the millions. Those numbers vary, but the key thing here is that a small business generally won't be able to afford the numbers related to suffering a cyber attack. And most critically, 60% of businesses that do suffer an attack go out of business within 6 months. So those numbers within that model hopefully drive home the point that as business owners, we have to take cybersecurity seriously and have some sort of plan in place to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, especially as it relates to cybersecurity having a high likelihood and a high impact, right? So with a high likelihood and a high impact, cyber protection or cybersecurity planning really becomes a priority one action item for protecting your organization. Meaning not only do you have an immediate resolution, which is planning, backing up your data, training your employees, having a process in place in the event that you get attacked, but also that you take seriously your detection and your protection processes, having a strong firewall, updating your software, your web security, patching your software, all of those things, being proactive and making sure that you're protecting your networks, training your employees, but that you also have a mitigation plan in place as well. So with that, what we'd like to do is take a little quiz, a little refresher from the last session. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the poll here. Let's see. So hopefully everybody can see the poll. The first question asks, name the company that was breached when hackers gained access to its systems through one of its business relationships, a small HVAC company. I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that. And we'll go ahead and post those results. Our answer in this case was Target. Target was the one who was breached through their relationship with the HVAC company. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. Let's see if I can pull this up in the polling. What percentage of small businesses are prepared to defend themselves against cyber attacks? I'm going to go ahead and turn off my little laser pointer here. Okay, we have some answers coming in, and we'll go ahead and share those results. And yes, our answer is 14%. So 14% of businesses are prepared to defend themselves against cyber attacks. And let's go to the next one. Let me see here. It's always a little clicking process to get through the questions here. And I did make the poll available for our panelists to vote as well. So the next question, what is the priority when the risk likelihood is high and the impact is high? Is it we take no action, priority 1, priority 2, or priority 3? Okay. And yep, when we have high impact and high likelihood, then our priority is priority 1. And let's go to the next one. All right, I launched the poll first this time before I switch screens. Attacks utilizing false emails, chats, phone calls, or websites designed to impersonate a legitimate conversation in order to convince you to click a link, download a file, or provide your personal information is what? Phishing, malware, PII, or hacker? And that is considered phishing. That is a phishing attempt. Again, impersonating a legitimate communication to get you to click on something you really have no business clicking on is a phishing attempt. And our last question for our review on our previous session. A variation of malware that causes damage to a computer system and then demands money to restore it to working order is what? Kidnapware, malware, ransomware, or hostageware? And let's see if any other answers come through. And everyone is correct. That is ransomware. I am hoping for the day that somebody says hostageware, but It is ransomware, so that is correct. Good job, everybody. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing here, and we're going to go ahead and jump into our information security model. And excuse me. And again, so the information security model is the protection of information and systems from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So what is that? When we think about confidentiality, we're really talking about protecting information from unauthorized access and disclosure. For example, what would happen to your company if customer information like usernames, passwords, or credit card information was stolen, right? Integrity is protecting information from unauthorized modification. So, for example, what if your payroll information or a product design was changed? And then finally, availability is preventing disruption in how you access information. So, again, making sure that your information is available and protecting yourself to make sure that that information is available. So when we look at the information security model, it's important to understand that cybersecurity in the context of the larger information security plan to protect our data and info is just a part of that larger strategy to secure your company's critical info. Lacking any one of these components diminishes the effectiveness of the others. So what we'll be doing today is looking into each of these components in greater detail. And we'll start with privacy. So, excuse me. So privacy, very simply put, is protecting our personal information. That's it. It is protecting our personal information. That's that personally identifiable information that's our could be our full name, right? Our home addresses, our email addresses, our phone numbers, our bank account information, our dates of birth. It could be your social security numbers. It could be your driver's license info, your passport number. All of these things that are critical that can be accessed potentially by a bad actor and potentially cause you significant harm or significant financial harm. And one of the things we mentioned in the last session is that a lot of this information is being processed inside of your devices already, inside of your cell phones, inside of your smart TVs, inside of your computers, inside of all of those things inside of your home or inside of your office that could potentially be talking to the internet in some way. There's a high likelihood that some of this information may be processed through those devices. So again, it's critical to make sure that we are protecting those devices to make sure that that information doesn't get into the wrong hands. The next part of the information security model focuses on physical security. And physical security is protecting the protection of your property. For example, using fences and locks, making sure that you lock your machines if you leave to go to lunch, for example, that you secure your devices. If someone has physical access to your machine, things could become dire, right? Especially if that comes in, if your machine or your devices get into the wrong hands. You could potentially have printouts that are either confidential or critical information. If those are not secured, they could be potentially stolen, they could be copied or destroyed, and depending on those critical printouts, that could also have a negative effect on your business operations. So when we think about basic security requirements for physical protection or physical security, what are some of those things that we could be doing? Limiting physical access to the information systems, protecting and monitoring the physical facility. Somebody comes into your office, maybe you have a sign-in sheet, maybe you have security cameras, maybe you have people working inside the organization who are performing some sort of a security role, whether it's an actual security guard or maybe it's an office manager or a receptionist or all the coworkers who are engaged in making sure that unauthorized people are not just roaming around your offices. And everybody's vested in making sure that visitors are escorted in and out of the organization. So all in all, again, making sure that you're guiding people through and protecting the organization. When we think about information and hardware, the easy part of that is protecting the hardware. You can lock it in a room, you can chain it to a desk, you can buy a spare, but your hardware is really processing information. And it's the information that poses the problem, because the information can exist in more than one place. It can be transported, across the world in seconds, or stolen without your knowledge, right? So again, it's important that when you leave your office, and come back, just because your computer is still there doesn't necessarily mean that someone didn't access it and take your information or access your information. So it's critical to not only lock up your machine, but also shut down your machine, allow a password to enter your machine if you leave your desk. So don't leave your machine just up and running on your desk while you leave and go to lunch, or you leave for the day, or even if you leave to go down the hall to the restroom. Make sure that you've not only physically secured your machine, but that you've not allowed access to the information that's on your machine. And I apologize, everyone. I'm on day 3 after my second COVID shot, so I'm still working through some of these these symptoms. So I apologize for the coughing and the sniffles. So our next part of the information security model is contingency planning and disaster recovery, and that is what are those steps that you have in place in order to get your business back up and running in the event that you do have some sort of cyber attack. It's also known as business continuity planning. Getting your business back up and running following an incident. And it's important to understand that business continuity planning, that contingency planning, the disaster recovery planning doesn't just apply to a cyber incident. What if your organization, your building had a fire, or what if there was a flood? What if there was some environmental issue that happened? That business continuity planning would apply to all of those things. So it's important to have a plan in place in order to get the business back up and running. We will actually cover business continuity planning in more detail in the last session of this training program. But if you recall from the previous statistics, there's a high probability that your company has already experienced some form of breach, whether it's minor or major, whether you know about it or not. Remember that 50% of businesses suffered a breach in the last year. And so in the event that your business experiences a cyber attack, you'll need to have a plan in place to quickly get your business systems back up and running. So, making sure that you have, not only that you have a plan, but that you test it and you engage it and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, that your appropriate stakeholders are copied or contacted, and that you not only are backing up all your data, but that you're testing your backups. And we will be covering backup strategies next week. But also working on continuously improving your processes. When we talk about the definition of cybersecurity, we talk about it in terms of it being an art, because the bad actors out there are constantly improving their tactics to get your information. So we, as the users, need to continuously improve what we're doing to protect ourselves. So again, as we sort of drive home the point, to reiterate, something is statistically going to happen, whether it's accidental, environmental, or malicious. Something likely will happen. If you remember the statistics from the last Tuesday's class, 43% of data breaches from McAfee's data study, 43% of those data breaches were caused by people internal to the organization. Roughly half of those were accidental. About half of those were intentional. So it's important to understand that we need to train our people, make sure that we have good processes in place in order to make sure that that we're not hiring folks who could potentially do our organizations harm. And again, we have to be smart in how we prepare for potential disaster. Investing in protection technology and software is important, but so is investing in training employees and not assuming that you're 100% protected. Make sure you have a plan in place in the event that attacks happen. No different than if you have a fire drill. Nobody likes doing fire drills, but they're critical to make sure that if a fire does happen, that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. So with that, we'll go to our next piece of the information security model, which is operational security. Sorry. And excuse me. And operational security is the overall development and protection of business plans and processes. So it's that development of those plans, and then we'll cover these in more detail. Again, the plans that we want to put in place, we'll cover those in more detail in our last session. But when we look at operational security, it's important to understand that operational problems can't be fully solved by the technology alone, because the person who makes a misconfiguration could also potentially remove technical features, right? So there's this human error, this human element involved that we have to address. So operational problems require operational solutions and operational competence of the organization. So that can include, the operational security policy, which is going to provide clear guidelines on what employees are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. A change management process will define and control how changes to the network are executed, how they're monitored, how they're logged and executed in a controlled way. The change management process is critical. It's one of the major breaches that we covered on that slide with all the companies that got attacked in the last 10 years. One of those companies was Maersk, one of the shipping companies. Their major breach occurred while they were doing or conducting a software update. And so we're not sure if that was a flaw in their change management process, but there was a vulnerability there while they were going through the company-wide update. And that's when the ransomware that hit their company was able to get in there. Next, we look at access control, and that's the practice of restricting access to network devices, right? So in a lot of networks, too many people may have access to network devices who shouldn't, and restricting this number to the minimum amount of people necessary will help reduce the risk. Authorization is the system that allows or doesn't allow access, allow an individual access to networks or devices, right? You have to be authorized to use certain networks or devices. That kind of goes in line with access control. And then dual control is making sure that that security control, network control are not the responsibility of the same group, separating out the duties to make it harder to deliberately misconfigure devices, right? Having that dual access helps add a little more security. And while all of the previous measures are active attempts to detect any potential changes in the network, securing and verifying helps to detect policy violations by analyzing traffic on the network. So, and then finally, automating the tasks. The more you are able to automate, the less likely you are to make mistakes. And if a mistake does happen, it's a lot of times systematic and easily detectable. I know it can be hard, difficult to implement a comprehensive operational security environment. And some of the measures, excuse me, some of the measures can require a certain organizational size and certainly a cost to the organization to work properly. But at a minimum, the goal should be to carry out some of these steps incrementally over time, and help improve the processes in whatever ways are the most feasible for your organization. So with that, we'll go on to the next one, which is critical, and that's personnel security. So personnel security goes back to that piece that I mentioned a few minutes ago about those intentional breaches from our internal employees, right? So when we talk about personnel security, we're talking about, simply put, using background checks for employees, right? Making sure that the people that we hire are not likely to do us harm. And that could be screening individuals prior to authorizing access to information systems containing critical information. It could include doing full nationwide criminal background checks, sexual offender checks, if possible, doing credit checks on all prospective employees, especially if they're handling your business finances or handling your private customer information. And then finally, ensuring that data and information systems containing critical information are protected during and after personal actions, such as terminations or transfers. Somebody leaves your company, make sure that their access to your information is revoked immediately. And then we get to the final leg in the stool, which is the reason that we're all here, cybersecurity. And again, cybersecurity is just a part of this overall information security model. And we covered this definition last time, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago. It's the art of protecting your networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. So we talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability in the context of the information security model. The same assurances apply specifically to the cybersecurity component of that, making sure that you're keeping that information confidential and maintaining the integrity and making sure that it is available to you. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we'll actually be covering the technical components of this in our fifth session when we talk about controls and protections. But when we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about the actual, as my business partner will put it, the actual nerd speak, as he puts it. He's our technical person. Securing our network connections, making sure that we have our security software in place and that it's up to date and that it's tested. Making sure that we have our encryption tools and our email filters and all of those technical components that we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep those bad actors from accessing our networks. And then also, what are the steps that we have in place to dispose of our media in the event that we're no longer using it? How do we maintain our software and our hardware? How are we protecting it? What are those things that we're doing to physically protect our networks from breaches and cyber attacks? So with that, I have a short video for you guys, and it just sort of summarizes the process of how we protect our information inside of our organizations. So this video should be about 3 minutes or so.
Protecting controlled, unclassified information in a controlled environment is paramount to the success of your organization. The CUI program defines a controlled environment as any space or area with adequate physical or procedural controls to limit unauthorized access to CUI. Let's step inside of this office to see some measures that your organization can take to create a controlled environment. Suppose this is an office of an organization that regularly uses CUI. Is this a controlled environment appropriate for CUI storage and use? Let's take a closer look. There's a conference table in the center of the room. On this table, there are some documents marked as CUI, haphazardly stacked. There are several people in this office, 2 of whom are deep in conversation about CUI, and the third is a member of the office's cleaning crew, who does not have a lawful government purpose to access this information. For CUI that exists in the physical environment, such as documents, the CUI program requires that inside a controlled environment, there is at least one physical barrier to prevent unauthorized access to CUI. Organizations have some flexibility when deciding what constitutes a controlled environment. Suitable environments can be established by using measures that limit or control access to the area. Examples of ways to control access include using standard key locks, utilizing electronic access control devices, or even employing security or administrative personnel. In areas where employees work in close proximity to individuals who may not have the same need for access, or what we call lawful government purpose in the CUI program, it may be necessary to ensure that the workforce has adequate security equipment, such as lockable doors, cabinets, or drawers to secure CUI when it is not in use. It is also important to establish suitable areas for holding meetings in which CUI will be discussed. When considering your controlled environment, ask yourself, who works in this space? Who has unescorted access to this space during and after normal business hours? Oftentimes, cleaning or maintenance crews have unrestricted access to areas where CUI is handled or processed, and this presents a risk to that information. Is the area suitable for sensitive discussions? Can anyone, even those who are unauthorized, overhear conversations? Is there a visitor escort policy? Most controlled environments will employ some sort of escort control policy to ensure that there is no unauthorized disclosure of CUI. Very quickly, it becomes apparent that this space is not a controlled environment. What could have been done differently to make this office more secure? Now, back inside the office, we see that there are several secure locked file cabinets that have been added to the area, and that all CUI has been moved inside these receptacles. Each file cabinet is marked as containing CUI. The cleaning crew now has conscientious escorts. Much better. This office is now on its way to being a controlled environment suitable for CUI storage and handling. But what about for CUI use? What other precautionary measures must an organization take when working with CUI?
So that was the part of the video that I wanted to share. I always like the I guess the creepy guy reading all this stuff on the tables. But it's sort of some drastic examples. But the point is, when we have people who shouldn't have access to our critical information, we have to make sure we do a good job of not allowing those folks inside of our offices to see that information. We don't necessarily have to follow and keep an eye on everyone and give them the dirty looks along the way, but it's important to make sure that that information is protected. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's session with a summary quiz. And I'll see if we have any questions, and we don't. Excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And for our first question today, and this first question says, this part of information security focuses on background checks for new employees and protecting information when employees are terminated. Which part of the information security model is that? And we've got an answer coming in. All right, we got a couple answers coming in, and we'll go ahead. And you guys are correct. That is the personnel security model. Let's see, our next question. This type of information security sets clear guidelines on what is allowed and not allowed. It clearly defines the responsibilities and authorization as well as disciplinary actions in the case of breaches. And excellent, we've got answers coming in, and that is operational security. Fantastic. And our next question. This type of information security focuses on protecting credit card, bank account, driver's license, and social security numbers. And we've got some answers coming in. Excellent. And that is the privacy policy. And the privacy policy is critical. That lays the foundation for how your organization addresses protecting information, whether it's printed, whether it's digital. The privacy policy really lays out the organization's approach, its commitment to protecting critical information. Oops, let's go ahead and launch the next question. All right, next question. Resuming normal business after a cyber incident will be greatly aided with this part of the information security model. And all right, and we have disaster recovery is our answer. So having a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan in place, and again, not only for a cyber incident, but for any kind of environmental incident that could potentially disrupt your business operations. And we'll go to the last question. We'll go ahead and launch that one. And the last question, when you leave for lunch, you lock your documents in the file cabinets, turn off your computer and secure it to your desk, and you lock your office door. This is what? Right on, everybody's got the answer, and that's great. That is physical security. So physically locking and protecting your devices and protecting your data from unauthorized access. So that is fantastic. So again, as we wrap up for today, it's important with all of this training, it's important that we try to change the mindset and the culture in our organizations. We have to assume that we're targets. We have to make available the necessary training for our employees. We have to intensify the level of vigilance and awareness of the possible risks and threats that exist. And if you don't have the tech resources in-house, try to identify a provider that can help you conduct risk assessments and identify cyber threats to your business, help you develop an incident response plan, and help implement countermeasures to mitigate those high probability threats. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Make sure to always be cyber smart, think before you click. And with our next session, we'll get back together on Tuesday, the 13th, and we'll be jumping into course number 2, where we cover the human factors of cybersecurity. Tuesday's session will cover user behavior, and next Friday's session we'll jump into the various backup strategies that we can employ to make sure that we can recover our data in the event that we do have some sort of cyber incident. So with that, I'm just taking a look to see if we have any questions. And looks like we don't have specific questions, but Karina has mentioned that the link posted in the chat is disabled. So hopefully we can make that link an active link. But with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see everyone on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks so much. And I will email you the links. So my apologies that that one is disabled. Let me actually see if I can get one that's working to you right now before we end the webinar. Give that a try. All right, that one should work. And again, I will also email that to you. So thank you so much for your attendance. And Chad, as always, a pleasure. And we'll wrap it up.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.